Good morning, everybody. Bright and early here. We did push it, to the right just for all you late risers out there. Not really. We had some other stuff we had to get figured out. Dante will be in here in just a second. He had a little technical difficulty. Haven't reloading his system right now, so he can jump in here. But the emphasis today is going to be on the Beautiful Trouble meets Unconventional Warfare article that we put out. Oh, here we go. Dante, right now. One sec. All right. What's up, Dante?
It was going on. Sorry, I'm a little tardy for the party. Had some technical difficulties.
No worries at all. I like the avatar this time.
Yeah, I figured did Mount Duty last time because he was the topic of discussion. So I pulled this from Canvas's website.
Heck yeah.
Powered
It's
for the
funny how they all these movements use that same symbol. All the collectivist movements throughout history use that same damn symbol. But it is kind of what it is. Symbolism works for a reason. So, all right, man. Well, you ready to jump into this? Go through Beautiful Trouble, and then kind of how it fits into the unconventional warfare model that special forces uses when they go into country and do unconventional warfare, right?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, like let's jump into it. I think your Substack is a great starter point, and then we can also pull some different quotes from the actual text itself and go into maybe give a little bit of history on Canvas, what we just talked about, and Bob Helvey and you know Harvard and their origins over Albert Einstein. But I think instead of going into like the affiliations, the networks specifically for this, I think we could probably just focus a lot more on the doctrinal side of this and some of those comparisons.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before, so the article kind of goes through unconventional warfare first, but I actually want you. You're the um, Beautiful Trouble expert, so I want you to kind of break down that real quick. I'll show you right here. All right. Kind of break down that for our viewers, and then we'll start fleshing it out from there.
Okay, so there's actually been a couple of different iterations of it. Probably the most popular one, which people use, is it was written in 2012, and it's really just like this this collection of different activists from different sectors, whether it be from all these different movements, whether it be Agit Pop, Code Pink, Smart Meme, the Alliance of Community Trainers and Nonviolence International. ICNIC is really a large part of this as well. Um, that's kind of like the parent, the overhead of all this, the ICNC as well, and that's really kind of the genesis of where all this began. But Beautiful Trouble is basically it's like the OG Bible for strategic nonviolent conflict. Is like the actual political term, like poli-sci term behind it. And this is an actual field of study, which Harvard has really kind of undertook a lot of this. As a matter of fact, if you go into the Harvard Kennedy School in the Belfer Center, you'll find that a lot of these participants who had actually written this book and created a lot of this doctrine are now instructors over there. And so it really kind of gives someone who doesn't study this a good baseline as to what they can expect. A lot of their other literature is a lot smaller, but this is big scale. This is 400, it's almost 500 pages, so it's really a lot to go through. And people spend literally institutions will spend whole semesters going over this specific book. So I think it really gives us some insights into their playbook, and I think anyone who wants to, counteract what we're seeing a lot with, the PSL, the PSL was founded by the Party of Socialist and Liberation was founded by, Code Pink founder Jody Evans's husband. Um, and she was one of the architects on this book. She's one of the authors of it. So I think it really gives us some strategic insight, and especially at a tactical level, because this gets down to the nitty gritty. I mean, this takes the macro, throws it all the way down into the micro. So I think that's just a really good overview of it. And again, like I said, uh, there's a lot to go through. If you want me to, I can name some of the theories they discuss in here. You've already alluded to some of them, addressed some of them in that Substack, which is excellent. But it's hard to condense 475 pages down into even 20 pages as you did on that.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
there's
No.
a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. Give some of those good examples, and especially some that may not have been in the article, so that the viewers, if they want to go in and look and see, then they can compare some of those too. Absolutely.
Well, I think we'll probably actually get to some that were in the article too. So the book is broken down into sections. At first, you have the introduction, you have tactics, and then you have principles. And then after principles, you have theories, and then you have case studies, and that's followed by practitioners. And each of these generally go for about 100 pages. But here's just a few of these names and how they have really actually perfected this down to an art. And keep in mind that this is the edition which was produced 13 years ago. And they're still using a lot of these same tactics. So, uh, one, artistic vigil is one, blockade is another. I'm listing off some of their tactics: identity correction, image theater, invisible theater, mass street action, media jacking, occupation, nonviolent search and seizure, strategic nonviolence, and prefigurative intervention. Those are some of these tactics. Some of the principles include balance art and message, brand or be branded, choose tactics that support your strategy, choose your target wisely, consensus is a means, not an end. Escalate strategically. If protest is made illegal, make daily life a protest. Kill them with kindness. Know your cultural terrain. Heard that before. Maintain nonviolent discipline, which is violent, but again, this is going back towards even more uh, historical documents.
Mhm.
A lot of manufacturing consent, Chomsky, even going even all the way back before that. You'll see it with Habermas and some of these other guys going way back, Franklin School in particular. Um, some more of their principles are shift the spectrum of allies, stay on message, and turn the tables. Another one is actually titled "This Ain't the Sistine Chapel." Theories: action logic, alienation effect, anti-oppression, commodity fetishism, cultural hegemony, which is a big one that goes all the way back to Gramsci,
Mhm.
environmental justice, ethical spectacle, hashtag politics, pedagogy of the oppressed, points of intervention, the social cure, the shock doctrine, theater of the oppressed. And some of their case studies are labeled as Battle in Seattle, Billionaires for Bush, Citizens Posse, The Clandestine Insurgent, Rebel Clown Army, and The Couple in the Cage. Daycare Center Sit-In. I wonder if it's at one of those Laring centers up in Minnesota. Um, and The Harry Potter Alliance, Mining the Museum, Modern Day Slavery Museum, The Nihilistic Democratic Party, The Santa Claus Army, The Stolen Beauty Boycott Campaign, The Trail of Dreams, Who's Tea Party, and the Wisconsin Capitol occupation. And those are just some of the case studies they have as well. There's obviously a lot more in there, but it ends on page 404 with write your own case study.
Mhm.
So I think that just gives a pretty good outline of the variation we see within the text itself, and I implore anyone. It's a daunting task to undertake, but if you got the stones for it, definitely do it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a good read, and again, this is all about raising awareness. So one of the things, another key concept is creating lose lose scenarios for law enforcement or for whoever you're pushing activism against. Okay, so they want to set, like you said, the non-violent but violent. They want to set the stage where if there isn't a response, they have successfully occupied or disrupted whatever their goal was. And then if there is a response, they get to market off of off of the response that happens to them, and use that to push further outrage on authoritarianism, or like the same thing that's happening with ICE right now. They're putting themselves in these positions so that there has to be a response, because if there's not, then they win from there. So that's absolutely another cool concept of this, and I think again the general populace understanding, so that when they see this happening, they understand what is happening. So instead of pulling up this video of a lady getting dragged out of her vehicle, by ICE, and being outraged because, oh my gosh, they shouldn't be dragging this innocent woman out of this vehicle, and so on and so forth. That's the framing. That's not the reality of what happened. The reality of what happened is they put themselves in a position where they forced law enforcement, ICE, whoever, to react in a way, and then they try to market that reaction. So that's a huge aspect of this all. And this is derived from not only UW doctrine, from psychological operations doctrine, and from information operations doctrine, not just in the United States, but doctrine that has been written from different societies, different militaries, and different activists around the world. So that's kind of what we're
I
going.
think I think if we were to look at the book, because they also give examples as well. One is listed in there, Cindy Sheehan, and the principles she used in there, as we listed in earlier just now at the onset. Um, she used basically three different principles. One, put your target in a decision dilemma. Two, lead with sympathetic character. Three, shift the spectrum of allies. And the story, the context they use, and this is really important for people to understand. She uses a case of a Gold Star mother named Cindy Sheehan, who is listed as the peace mom. And if you want me to, I can kind of give like just their quick paragraph rundown
Yeah.
as to how they use this. Okay, quote: Cindy Lee Miller Sheehan, or the peace mom, is best known for her peaceful anti war vigil named Camp Casey. After her 24-year-old son, U.S. Army Specialist Casey Sheehan, was killed in the Iraq War in April 2004. President Bush met in Fort Lewis with Cindy and other grieving parents to pay them his respects. According to Sheehan, Bush behaved disrespectfully at his meeting, forgetting her deceased son's name and leaving her questions unanswered. In response, she co founded Gold Star Families for Peace, and in August 2005, she camped outside then President Bush's Crawford, Texas ranch for 26 days, demanding answers and another meeting with him, neither of which occurred. With her action, Sheehan attracted national and international support and media attention. She has since participated in anti war protests across the nation, given speeches, written articles, and ran against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as an independent candidate after Pelosi did not take initiative to impeach Bush. And again, this is taking, Cindy, they're using this example of Cindy Sheehan, who would typically, you know, normally we would see her as like this kind of patriotic, military mom. And they highlight her metamorphosis into like this, her transformation into this anti-war activist. And again, that shifts her whole spectrum of allies. And she had put Bush in, in a decision dilemma with her protests. So that's just one of the many examples that they use of their tactics and principles actually being deployed operationally in reality. So
Mhm.
that was a good one to share, man.
Absolutely. And so not just the left. There's the right does this as well, but the left absolutely loves to capitalize on these types of situations, and then kind of foment the activist out of that, who that person that was wronged, or that person that didn't seek or is seeking justice but didn't receive it, and so on and so forth. So they elevate these people. Then they get a platform and they get funding behind them, and that's a big part of all of this that we're seeing. I mean, none of these protests are organic. It's not a thing that happens anymore. People are always they're not gonna just go walk down the street and try to find a protest. They're going online. They're searching for the coordination of where this protest is going to be, of who they should talk to when they get there. Again, I mean, you're talking about people that are followers. Who's going to go to a protest as if you're the person that is a strong-willed, you're a type A, you lead from the front. You're not going to one of these protests on a whim, right? You're these people are looking at this situation, they're finding the activism inside of it, and that is giving them the guide where they go forwards from there. So that's why you see so many of these protesters at different protests across the country. It's the same people, and they're just moving across the country to continue protesting. It's become a job for a lot of people, which is kind of insane to me if you think about it.
Well, no, it actually is. As a matter of fact, you can even find some of these job listings on. There was a story a while back. It was this reporter had talked about they were shocked to find this job advertisement for these paid protesters, like these professional protesters. And a lot of them, how they start these people off is they'll put them into like acting auditions and stuff like that. Like that's how they'll pose. And then it's gotten to the point now where they just openly advertise these jobs. They were all over Craigslist. They were even on Facebook Marketplace. Of all
Right.
things. So I mean, it's very rampant. But you're right. These there's a cadre which is very well funded, very well trained doctrinally, and they are sent all throughout the country to become force multipliers. And this book really provides a lot of the genesis for that. So I think again, if we want to understand what's happening, rather
Mhm.
than just being pissed off at, the people burning down Minneapolis on the screen, understand that what that is, it's a construct. It
Yeah.
is it is a projection. It's an anticipation, something which was planned. So I don't think people need to look at this as just, something happening in the minute. I think they need to understand the grand scheme of all this, just like even for, let's say even for J6, the two buses which randomly bust in, hundreds of people actually into the crowd. And nobody just so happens to know anything about it. It's probably just another example, but again, this is how they are doing this. That they have studied the doctrine behind this, and I think as we get into the kind of history of it, just brief history, talking about Helvey, a lot of people will understand where that comes from and how they were able to adopt these unrestricted warfare tactics. And they do have a lot of assistance from foreign actors as well.
Mhm.
The national network of Cuba is not a one-off event. That's nothing random. Um,
Right.
so just wanted to point that out. But again, that's getting into the network side, getting around the doctrinal stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm going off on
And
a tangent here.
another way you can kind of always tell too is when you have these, I wouldn't call them necessarily counter protesters, but when you have, either independent journalists or you have people try to go out and talk to these protesters, if you were genuinely out protesting a grave injustice, you would probably know what that injustice is, and you would have a lot to say about it because you're out on the streets protesting it, right? So you would have, hey, I disagree with this because this is this is this, and you would go through the ins and outs of why you disagree with it and what's wrong and all this stuff. What you'll notice is the second anyone tries to question any of these protesters, the cadre that we have talked about, the real professional ones, the ones that are trained and the ones that are training the trainers, they're generally there's at least some of them present at these, and they're shutting down discussion. The purpose of all this is not discussion. It's not to find a better way. It's not even to really change anything from a standpoint that discussion would lead to that change. It's simply to create a reaction and to create a response from it. That's why you can never talk to them. They don't really know the ins and outs of why they're there. They just know that they were told something was bad, and no kings. We don't like kings in America. Like, no shit, we stopped that in 1776. So there hasn't been a king since then. So why are we protesting about a king when it's still, like, we still don't have a king? We have a president who was duly elected, and there's really no questioning that. But you try to talk to them in those terms, you try to lay it out, like, why are you out here protesting? Then there's no answers. It's all, they try to silence you, they try to move away, or they start yelling or chanting, because that's what they fall back to, because that's, it's easier to just start chanting something that you've already practiced than to try to answer questions based on a discussion you're not willing to have anyway. So, all right, now let's go through some doctrinal stuff here. I'll show you the UW aspect of it all. So this is all from ATP 3-18.1. This is the newest version of this. It didn't change a whole lot from the previous version, but it really just kind of updated the fact that now we have a lot more digital interaction, and there's a lot more of the preparation phase that can be done easier without boots on the ground. So those are kind of the main changes. But UW inside of the, from the military standpoint, goes through preparation, 7 steps. It goes to 7 stages. It goes through preparation, initial contact, infiltration, organization, build up, employment, and transition. And all of those have a key kind of, it's not a specific thing that needs to happen before you can move to the next phase. And sometimes you can move through multiple phases all at once. It's a very fluid framework. So you kind of have to understand that the reality of the situation is going to always be a little bit different. There's never the insurgency or revolution that goes specifically through each phase, 100%, hits every target, and then moves on to the next. So again, take this framework for what it is, but and they're all kind of self-explanatory. Preparation, right? What are you doing? You're preparing the battlefield. So IPB is just another point of this, and you're making sure that you have highlighted some grievances. You've already got some messaging out there, so that when you do get on the ground, it makes it easier to continue on with your messaging and to gain more of a following. And also, this is all where they kind of set up the initial link ups and how that's all going to work during the initial contact. So the initial contact is really from a risk of men and mission standpoint. That's the most dangerous part for the operators going in, right? So, because you have to infiltrate clandestinely, you have to get in without anyone knowing other than the people that you're going to be meeting with, and hoping that they aren't compromised. So this all part is very dangerous. So that's why preparation is so important, to ensure that your initial contact and then your infiltration goes smoothly getting into the country. All right.
And this is to kind of transition and make a comparison, that this is why Antifa actually has their own vetting process for this very specific reason. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Right. And any insurgency or resistance movement is also going to have a vetting process, because again, think about, this isn't a game at this point anymore. We're not just moving around a country that is free and you're not going to get in trouble for anything. We're talking about authoritarian countries that are under a regime, a tyrannical regime that is going to either arrest them or kill them for pushing back against the system. So when you're looking at this, you have to realize, they're not going on Facebook and posting this stuff, in Iran before the resistance movements kind of started there recently. But you would get jailed or arrested or even executed for certain things there. So of course they're going to have to vet that, because they got to make sure that you're not an operative from the government that's coming in to compromise their network and then arrest and kill everybody that's involved. So this is all very delicate. This uses a lot of different, I would say, connections, whether that be CIA or other three letters that are operating in different countries. And another thing I want to point out too is, like, the CIA, this and that, you can have your negative thoughts about some of the things the CIA has done in the past. It's an intelligence network, right? It's an intelligence community. And of course, a lot of the things that happen are going to happen clandestinely, and they're going to happen behind the scenes. But what they are great at is cultivating assets inside of these countries. And these assets inside of these countries is what's going to allow the preparation, the initial contact, and then eventually the infiltration to go smoothly. So from those standpoints, that's what's important from a CIA's perspective, is that they foster these relationships with local assets that have access and placement, and that can move things along to get operatives in to start kind of pushing this stuff, and then building the auxiliary, the underground, and the guerrilla movement. Even if some of it may have already been built, right? And that just depends on how ripe that country is for a revolution. But all of this kind of goes through the same steps. I mean, in Beautiful Trouble, they're going through preparation before. They're not just walking in and doing a flash mob somewhere or a demonstration, right? They're going through, they're planning it, they're talking to the right people, and they're establishing all the different connections and supplies and logistics they're going to be required to make this happen. So it's all just ops, one after another, moving forward in this agenda. And you have infiltration. Obviously, is where you actually move into the country, link up with the auxiliary underground, whoever's part of this resistance movement, and then organization starts. That's where you're building the network, you're building it out, whether it's already somewhat built out or whether you're starting from scratch. If there's not a shadow government, if there's not a government in exile, then now this is a even more difficult proposition, because you have to look at this, find the right people, and then approach them in a way that isn't going to compromise you later or compromise a strategic asset of yours. So you have recruiters, and they're going to be a face, but you have to compartmentalize so that if they are compromised, not everybody else is compromised. So this is all a delicate process. And then from there, we'll kind of skip some of these, or we won't go into as much detail into these later ones, like transition. I mean, the Beautiful Trouble is not really focused on the transition aspect of that, because there's different goals involved with what they're trying to do, as opposed to overthrowing a tyrannical government and then replacing it with one that is either democratic or at least is fair to the populace. But your buildup obviously is just going to be where you're getting your guerrilla force, you're getting your auxiliary and your underground to be as robust as necessary to make sure that everything can happen. And so the auxiliary is going to be kind of your clandestine network of individuals. They're not going to be coming to meetings. They're not going to be part of the underground that is meeting and planning and doing all that. They're people with access and placement, and they're allowing networks to foster. So say a medical network, or a weapons and ammo resupply, or setting up safe houses. All these things are going to be done by the auxiliary. And these assets are going to be used kind of in a cell-like structure, so that they can't compromise anything, because they are just operating in the real world every day. So they're going to have their normal jobs, so you might have some truck drivers that you have used to set up clandestine logistical routes to move certain things around the country in ways that would otherwise be monitored. So that's kind of the auxiliaries aspect of that. The underground is going to be more your government in exile, or your shadow government that is actually doing the planning. It's going to be the people that are really behind the scenes. They're not in everyday life necessarily as much as the auxiliary are. And then you have your guerrilla force that would be built out, which is your paramilitary force to actually hit targets, and then to bring the violence of action aspect into the movement. So the buildup is a little bit different, obviously, for Beautiful Trouble and for the activist kind of phase, because they're not really going into necessarily full on violent attacks. Antifa does, but you've kind of seen how that works out for them. So it's just a little bit different from that standpoint. And then employment, obviously, is going to be another one of those that the employment for Beautiful Trouble or for activists is going to be slightly different than full-fledged combat operations that are unfolding on targets of opportunity and around the country that you're in. So those are some of the breakdowns of that, and then that's how that's built from the UW perspective and stages. And then we'll go through now how that kind of fits in with Beautiful Trouble and the way that they use this doctrine and use it to create these activist movements and to push different information or different operations.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack with that one right there, man. I would say that there is one thing, one clear distinction between, this from a UW aspect and, what we see with color revolutions, and that's that from the UW side, and again, this goes back to messaging. There's typically, a set mission. And with an organic revolution, you can always tell if it's organic or it's not organic. And that, what are they protesting? What's the messaging? What's the narrative? Um, and you'll typically find that in color revolutions, um, there's just 1,000 different messages there, and they're very kind of unorganized in that sense. So what they do is, again, these cadre, they have to kind of main, they have to kind of streamline that messaging in order to get everyone on board. That's why when you see these videos, these protesters, what are you here protesting today? Oh, I don't really, I'm not supposed to talk to you, or I don't really know, or, like they won't know what their sign says. That's the role that the cadre in organizing the color revolution, because again, it's not organic, so they haven't found what that intent purpose is. And that's kind of one distinction between an organic revolution and um, uh, a not so genuine color revolution, because there are genuine color revolutions as well, but they're very few, which are organic. And just to kind of give people some context here about the doctrine and where they get their numbers from. So a lot of this is based off of, and you can even go into Harvard. They have a whole section on this, a whole text actually called NAVCO, that's NAVCO, and that's their manuals which outline color revolutions. And the architect here of what we see currently is a woman named Erica Shanoff, and she conceived the rule called the 3.5% rule. And with all their analysis and studies, what they had found was they typically only needed 3.5% of a population to nonviolently protest without resistance in order to have a successful color revolution and overthrow whichever or in this case how it typically goes, implement whichever regime they want. Keep in mind, 1979 is probably the best scenario when the leftists marched with the Islamists, and that was a decision they very much came to rue. But again, doctrinally, um, they don't need much if people aren't paying attention. 3.5% of the U.S. population is very minuscule. So, and this is why they're so effective at social media. And they've also studied this as well. And again, it goes from the messaging that, the liaisons are, again, it's just the operatives, the operators who infiltrate, um, they carry that specific messaging from, the structured entity down to the field level, and then they use that as a sort of force multiplier recruiting initiative or force multiplier. That is the same role the cadre serves when it comes to these NGOs down to like the molecular level on the street. So uh, just I think it's probably the best comparison, but you can definitely tell if a revolution is organic or not.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like if you look at Iran right now, and you look at how that kind of began, there was a clear catalyst that brought together all of the uh, different things that were wrong with the country, the things that thousands, probably millions of citizens were upset about. But then the real drops to what 1.4 million per U.S. dollar, and so catastrophic collapse, along with all the other issues that you get from an authoritarian regime, and then you have organic protests breaking out all across the country, and a lot of that's pushed because normal people with normal jobs were no longer out. They're no longer able to afford basic goods. And once that happens, that's an organic begin to a resistance movement that is unlike some of these color revolutions that we're actually going to talk about. So now, where the Iranian resistance movement goes from here is depending. I did an article on that. It's depending on some other factors, and they are going to need some outside help. Unfortunately, unarmed populaces just don't do well against a authoritarian, well armed regime, right? And Iran is not is a little more capable than Iraq was when we invaded. It's a lot more capable from a lot of different standpoints, and uh, Iran just geographically is a difficult problem to try to break down and assess from a military perspective, because you're not invading Iran very easily. It's mountainous. There's deserts. It's a hard lift. So it makes it even harder to support the people from there. But just so you can kind of understand the difference between that breaking out and then maybe Arab Spring from a color revolution perspective.
And just another observation to add to that, you can always tell if a color revolution is genuine or not, based off of the response by asking the simple question, or based off the response from the authorities. For example, in Iran, they had to shut down the whole internet. This was the point. They were trying to shut down everything and just silo the country uh, from a telecommunications standpoint. This is vastly different than color revolutions, which rely on the internet, but they rely on censorship of the internet, um, as well as, well, let's call it, cancel culture to a certain degree. So they will never sit there and say, we need to completely shut down the internet in order, to, have a successful revolution or whatever. No, they will never argue for that. That is in stark contrast to what the authorities will do
Mhm.
and in an actual organic revolution, um, by actually completely shutting down the internet. So if what I will say is, if somehow a regime within which is placed in by a color revolution, um, ends up taking power, what they'll want is, even if there is another color revolution, they will never actually want at least for the immediate, for the internet to completely be shut down, for information totally be siloed, because they still require the centralization of that messaging. Now, Iran's been a regime for so long that all that that whole pathway was already consolidated to the point where they could shut down the internet even after their revolution, which started as a color revolution before it became extremely violent. Um, And so therein lies the difference. I think nowadays you see, democracy, as you call it, moving so fast that revolutions really can't even keep up with it. So just to kind of point that out, color revolutionaries, they rely on the internet, and but when they're actually in power and they've implemented their full regime, then they'll no longer need it. And I just what we're seeing in Iran with them immediately taking down the internet so fast right now is just it's just really mind-boggling to me that people don't understand that this is an actual organic revolution. Are there outside players involved here? Absolutely. But is this, the same as the Arab Spring, wherein the cadre were instructed at the Center for Applied Nonviolent Actions and Strategies in Serbia? No, it's not. So
Right.
it's just to kind of draw a little contrast there, man. I'm not sure if that was really concise at all, but just
No, it was.
an
And
observation.
it's a good point because when you think about we're blacking out the entire country. Uh, you're taking out all internet that's controlled by the state, and then that leaves some satellite, and that leaves Starlink, and then Iran went through and systematically jammed almost every population center, within a few days after taking the internet down, to then block out Starlink too. So it's very important for them to not allow information to escape. And the reasoning behind that is because they don't want anyone to see their response. So that's another way you can know that this is a legitimate revolution. If it was a color revolution, and if the regime was kind of okay with whatever was happening, they would be broadcasting and they would be pushing that messaging, from not, and they would allow other people to push it, because the organic posts from a bunch of different people kind of all at once saying the same thing is a much more effective way than just state pushed propaganda. And Russia has found this out, and many other countries have kind of taken the same model, where they create the situation or the opportunity, and then they kind of just allow the messaging that they've already established and they've already pushed to then get picked up by organic sources who don't actually know that they're just pushing or fomenting an operation. And so what we're seeing in Iran right now is a true resistance movement, that if certain things happen and they get this kind of some support, it could turn into a legit insurgency and a revolution. But right now, I mean, we're past. I think we're well past 50,000 that have been killed in Iran, and countless others, wounded and arrested and taken into custody. And so, there's a lot going on there that we don't even know about because they're still under that media blackout. And then, and one other little point from kind of a military SIGINT type perspective is that when you black out the entire country, right, and then you jam major population centers, if someone wants to get a message out, then they have to either leave that place that's jammed, and they have to go find an area where they can try to get this signal out. But anytime you blast a signal, right, so they can track that signal. So now it just creates another issue that you have to do something really quick and get a signal out, and then you have to immediately move and leave the area so that they don't find out that you just sent that signal and then interdict you and then take you in, because you're clearly part of some network that they're going to try to infiltrate and expose. So lots of different problems with the problem set right now in Iran, and why it's difficult, and then why hasn't the U.S. done this or that and everything. There's a lot of strategic issues with Iran, and with how close they are with Russia and China, that make it where we're not just going to drop a bomb and then make this now a U.S. war. It's important that the Iranian people are able to push through that. So that's a whole different concept and show. We can talk about that at a different time and jump
Yeah,
back into.
that's a whole different
Yeah,
session right there, man.
but just wanted to kind of highlight, like, that's why they blocked it out, and that's why they're clearly against this movement. It's not the same thing that we're talking about here in the color revolution or the beautiful trouble. And then, yeah, you've talked about Serbia. Here's the Otpor. You want to talk about that one a little bit, or go into any of these other Let's see what other examples we got here.
Yeah, man, we have so many examples here. Op4 was kind of the genesis for really a lot of this when it all began. And this is it's interesting too because Op4 began as a genuine revolution. It wasn't artificial. The students had actually begun this, and there is a New York Times article, which was an interview with Bob Helvian, where he openly discusses this. He was like, "Okay, I have to find out what's going on here because these students are genuinely uprising against Slobodan Milosevic. I had to understand, we're not pushing this. What's going on here? How can we weaponize this?" Is basically what he said. And keep in mind, he was a protege of a guy named Gene Sharp, the Albert Einstein Institute. Um, and he had wrote a book in, I believe it was 1993, uh, called From Dictatorship to Democracy. And this was kind of just like the general outline of where books like publications like Beautiful Trouble would, um, you know, originate from. A lot of this was born in this 1993 book, which he wrote, which Bob Helvey read, and then went on to study under him again over at Harvard University, which still runs a lot of the Canvas property today. But again, that's within the network itself. So what Bob Helvey did was he actually jumped on a plane and he went over to Romania and he had actually met with a lot of the um, Op-Poor movement, which was in Serbia against Milosevic at the time. And he basically sat down with them and said, "Okay, what's going on?" And he studied everything about it, and that's really kind of where this modern um, era of color revolutions began. And this was in 1998. And as a matter of fact, if you go into Harvard University now, you can still see that these original Op-Poor guys are the ones who are instructing a lot of these color revolution courses now. And I had talked earlier about Egypt and the Arab Spring, the color revolution, which again ended up bringing the Muslim Brotherhood to power in Egypt. So eventually, that's a whole nother discussion right there. But they're very kind of braggadocious about this, and the fact that they uh, talk openly about how they've conducted all these different color revolutions, going all the way back to the tulip revolution to the orange revolution in 2004. Even though the institute wasn't formally founded until I believe it was 2005, but it's pretty interesting because their staff are still, they're all still there. It's the original Outpour guys. They all have gone on to have extremely successful careers. As a matter of fact, the CEO of a telecoms company called Orion Telecom, which has been accused of doing some rather questionable things. He's also a teacher over at Harvard, still works with this. And as a matter of fact, Orion Telecom's registered incorporation address is the Canvas headquarters in Serbia. It's the same exact address. So again, there's just that's going into kind of the network side of it and showing, you know, that's a whole nother subject of discussion, topic of discussion. But a lot of these guys are still there. They're still teaching this, and so that's why the doctrine has really kind of managed to stay intact and why it's been such a successful model. And I think we're finally starting to see the cracks in it. But it's going to get watered down eventually as the generations go on, even though you'll see more literature about it and whatnot. But if anyone wants to understand more about how they weaponize social media, look at it's changed its name now, but it used to be called uh, SMAP up at New York University. It was largely led under guys like Tucker and a couple other dudes. Joshua Tucker, I believe his name is. He was one of the guys who had looked into the Internet Research Agency, but um, this guy basically wrote the book on how to use social media to manipulate it in order to get out, messaging which supports, you know, color revolutions, a lot of these progressive NGOs, and a lot of these NGOs ended up taking this, much like they did with Beautiful Trouble, and they train this all as a doctrinal level. That's why the left is so good with bot farms. That's why they're good at understanding like how technology works. Like when I see one of these Antifa guys with his cell phone, I know he's probably pretty new to the whole game because the vets, the OGs, the cadre, they understand how IMEI interfaces. We're
Mhm.
talking about signals intelligence. They understand how they can be tracked through all their phones, specifically through their IMEI. So um, you're seeing a lot more phones out, which tells me like they're kind of losing control of their doctrine a little bit, but they're also trying to proliferate as well. So I think that's one avenue we could use to really go after them. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, just throw a dragnet over it, man. You want to find out who these people are, just stage a protest, whatever. Go to one of their little protests because if the U.S. wanted to, there are people out there who have, if U.S. law enforcement, federal government apparatus wanted to, there are people out there, people like us, who study this stuff intimately, and we know their doctrine, their modus operandi very well, and we could be very effective as
Mhm.
agents against them to be able to just deal with this issue. Um,
Right. I did a little post. I think it was a week or two ago about how easy it would actually be for small. You don't even need big teams, and you don't need a ton of funding. Uh, Again, we've already had some. Data Republican and some other people have mapped these financial networks very well. But what and then there's some other people that have probably built some dossiers. I'm actually talking to another guy who's built some dossiers on some of these serial protesters and some of the cadre of this. And you've seen like Libs of TikTok will highlight this too. That's obviously all information that she was just given, but from these people that are trying to interdict this. But you could absolutely observe red cell. You could red cell these protests with groups of people and surveil them back, and you could link all of it to physical locations. You could identify safe houses. You want to call them trap houses. It's the same kind of method that you would do to try to interdict a drug network. You follow the people. Yes, some of them might have some training on how to do a route that would be harder to follow, but a lot of them are not. A lot of them are just they got paid their $500. They're going to go yell with this sign that they don't really know what it means, and then they're going to go turn their sign back in so that it can be repurposed for something else or go to a different protest the next day. So it would be very easy. It'd be very easy to interdict these if someone was so inclined to do so. So
yeah, and that to your point, we could theoretically, use our same tactics against them. We know their cultural terrain better than most of their, paid followers, their paid actors. We could, plant narratives and utilize their own media jacking, as they say, as a weaponized against them. Make them look like total retards because they all are. But you could do some real significant damage if, say some streamer or whatever on Blue Skies coming up and talking to people inside the resistance crowd, them shaking their fists, and they've got 10,000 people, whatever they're streaming to. You could do some serious damage with that. So
mm-hmm.
uh, I mean, that for me, that is a fantasy. I would love to do that. I would be like, a fat kid in a candy store excited to do something like that. Just
Yeah.
totally mind screw these people because they
Well,
are very fragile. Yeah.
it's important. I mean, yeah, I would be down to and between the contacts we all have, we could set this up and we could interdict these. And I'm not saying interdict them in a sense that we would use violence or we would use anything, but we could expose it all at a level and then lay out the information in a way that everyone would see and know what is going on. And then law enforcement from there can take that information and kind of run with it. And I know I've talked to some guys in Minnesota that are tracking these networks, and they're kind of aware and they understand how it works. They're still going to hit the bureaucracy, setbacks that are inherent, especially in these Democrat infested areas where they've taken control of almost every aspect. From they're not going to get that much help. If the chief of police is like, well, we're not going to look into this, then does a cop go rogue and risk getting fired to go after that? I don't think so, right? So, but they have funding. They have millions of dollars backing up these protests, and it's all from the left, and it's all left-leaning causes, and it's it's Soros, it's all these different networks that have already been identified and the funding sources. But who from the right is going to fund pushing back against it? And that's kind of a question that really needs to be asked, and somebody needs to step up and be like, hey, let's put some real money into this. Let's get some actual operatives onto the streets to identify all of these networks, identify all the key players, and systematically put out dossiers that are going to show exactly who these people are and what they're doing and how they're doing it, so that the world can kind of see, hey, this isn't real, this isn't organic, this is made up fairy tale nonsense meant to cause an emotional reaction out of you to get you to vote in a way, vote or think in a certain way. And that's kind of like the basis of it. But yeah, I mean, I agree, man. It's necessary, and hopefully there's people doing it and we just don't know about it. But I don't know.
Well, and you mentioned the bureaucracy too, and these guys, they understand that very well. And you look at some of the other documents, you won't find this in Beautiful Trouble, but there are other manuals out there which they actually discuss um, becoming informants, because that affords them certain protections, and so they intentionally become informants. They do, again, I talk about this a lot, the 90-10 rule. They feed them 90% good information so they can launder the 10% bad,
Mm-hmm.
which they actually rely on in order to continue their operations. And they understand that their handlers within law enforcement will grant them a certain degree of leniency or freedom or even protection, as we see with now the fact that there are over 200 FBI informants inside the J6 quote insurrection end quote. The
Yeah.
insurrection with no guns.
Right.
Uh, that's a whole nother discussion, though, man.
Oh God, yeah, we could talk about that all day long. And that's actually a perfect example of how you can have a very small amount of either activists or just people pushing a certain way that can entice a crowd to do things that it wasn't ever going to do beforehand. So yeah, we probably should do a show on that, just kind of break down how like this wasn't this wasn't an insurrection. Yeah, insurrections don't happen with unarmed populaces, and where no one's killed either. Like the only person that was killed was an unarmed protester, and they try to frame it that all these cops were killed. They weren't. A dude died from a heart attack like the next day. There's all these other little things that happened, but it wasn't a direct result of the ongoings of January 6th. I've said this before. I think protesters are like scum, all of them. And I think if you went to the Capitol on January 6th and you went inside the Capitol, which is even worse, if you just went to the protest just to kind of, oh, whatever, I'm a patriot. I mean, I wouldn't do it because I think that's insane. But whatever, that's fine. But if you went into the building, right, like did you think this was going to end okay for you, especially knowing that Trump lost and like the wrong side now is going to be in charge of your future because of those actions. You just got to think about stuff like that. So yeah, we definitely could talk about that all day long, but
I'm
but
not so sure Trump lost, buddy, but I mean he didn't get the sign off, if that's what you mean. But
right. Well, you
that's a
knew you
whole nother
still
discussion. Yeah.
right. I mean, they still knew though that he lost, right? Whether or not, obviously we've seen all this stuff come out, especially recently about the fraud and all the fake voter rolls and all the stuff. That's a whole nother topic, but the information we had at the time he had lost, and
Well,
so it's just
and that's an example of media jacking. They hijack the narrative.
yeah.
If they had actually planted a lot of these narratives. The blue wave is gonna, it's gonna be a red mirage versus a blue wave. It'll look early on like the Republicans are gonna take everything, and then the blue wave just comes in the middle of the night, like a
Mhm.
tsunami. Um, Except for me, it wasn't in the middle of the night, it was in the morning. Uh,
Right.
I was with one of my Nigerian friends actually, and he studies political science over here, and he said to me, he was like, "Well, now you know how Africans feel." Because he said it straight up. He was like, "Man, that was stolen," and it was very blatant. Like for people who are already awake, um, you know, they saw it like just
Mhm.
plain as day, man. But anyways, yeah, a whole nother space on that. But that's what they did with media jacking. Anyone who said otherwise, what was this? The color revolution. Don't take off the internet. No, we still need the internet in order to, finish this thing off, seal the deal, get our guy Biden into power, right?
Right.
Don't take off the internet. No. What you got to do is you have to take people off the internet. And they even took the president, the sitting president of the United States, off the internet,
Yeah. Yeah. I
which
mean,
was
that
the
should have been
craziest thing ever.
right. I mean, that should have been a red flag too. Like, why did they ban him on everything to where he no longer had a voice in social media? If they weren't concerned, So yeah, uh, that's all. It's all pretty crazy.
Yeah, and it's all laid out here. Like whenever you understand, their structure and their tactics and their doctrine, you'll see like historical precedents. I mean, not to the point where a president was canceled, unless you maybe want to say Kennedy, but that was a whole separate thing.
Mhm.
Um, if you're looking at this, man, I mean, you can really understand that there is nothing organic about what is happening in the US and in other places throughout the West. Um,
Mhm.
and again, that's why guys like Source and Singham, who, by the way, fund a lot of these publications, when you look at a lot of these publishers, these guys are all getting like this NGO money. And it's all these NGOs which get all this philanthropy, which is probably a large amount of fraud associated with it as well. And
Mhm.
you'll find that through the private equity angle, which is a whole nother spaces, man. It's so
Yeah.
disgusting, private equity, the way it's been weaponized, and a lot of these people who do it, these Keynesians, these Fabian socialists, understood very, decades ago that private equity is the way how they can subvert actual capitalism. It's crony capitalism,
Right.
and they've weaponized this, and you'll see this, especially probably within the coming months, that there are some activist private equity firms who are funding both sides of a lot of these conflicts, because if you want a true revolution, you have to have two sides. So
Yep. Well, and then I mean, why not profit off of both sides? I mean, it's a common practice in war. The United States does it. The United States, somehow our tax dollars are both, funding Israel to fight Hamas and funding Hamas to fight Israel. It's insane.
yeah,
So
exactly. And we just had that conversation a couple days ago, man. That Masri lawsuit, we're gonna have to jump into that one at a
mm,
different time. But that was really just scratching the surface of some of the other stuff I found. But
yeah,
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 I
we do,
mean,
we do need to talk about that. Well, maybe next week we'll do a space on that or a stream on
yeah,
that.
and just kind of keep going on this though, from like the I think it's probably best if people just read, what was written here, if they just read the Substack itself, because I mean, talking about it all day, it's very kind of academic in that sense, and I think it's probably better if people like engage
Mhm.
specifically, directly with the information. I mean, we can tell you where to look, but you can lead the horse to the trough, but you can't make them drink the water. So
Mhm.
um, we can sit there and tell you water tastes good all day. Here's what the water tastes like. Here's the the structure of the water, but
Right.
you have to absorb it for yourself. So I would really implore everyone to read this
Right.
Substack before getting into the other stuff, because there's many more manuals and stuff out there. Um, Again, they have to publish this stuff if they want to get their messaging out there, but that's a tool for us. The more they tell us, the more we need to listen and to interpret and decipher that information. But there are the similarities between unrestricted warfare, in which Bob Helvey, a U.S. Army psychological operations officer, went to Serbia to
Mm-hmm.
understand how to weaponize that revolution. Now you can kind of see how a lot of this kind of molds from an asymmetrical standpoint, and how the powers that be, the intelligence agencies are by their very nature full of revolutionaries.
Yep.
They're full of people who love revolution. They typically tend to skew really left. If I'm being honest, you'll find some right wingers on there, but I mean, in my limited interactions and the people I know who have gone into the intelligence community, they tend to be, the careerists at least tend to be kind of on the left side. Usually the guys who are a little more conservative tend to do their five and out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, the left is just naturally more authoritarian, and
yeah,
that's just because you collectivism has to be forced. You can't have collectivism and then allow other people to not be a part of that collectivism. That ruins the whole system, right? So you have to use force to implement these systems. And that's why you see leftists that have to use these kind of tools to. I mean, we're a free society, right? That's another way you can also know that these protests are false, like especially the ICE ones. In what way, in what negative way is immigration enforcement affecting these middle-aged liberal white women? Like, how is this negatively affecting your life? And especially if you don't even live here, even if you do live here in this community, they're going after criminals first. They're not just like, oh, Juan Carlos over here, let's just check and see. They're actively searching for criminals, and then they're because you're pushing operations. You have to push the operation in a manner that is the most efficient, right, and most effective. And who is going to be the people that you really need to get first? It's the criminals. They're the ones that have set up the networks. They're the ones that are in charge of all the different things. Like this guy that has done, is part of the drug trade, but he's also an illegal alien. His network is far bigger than just a dude that came illegally, but now he works for a construction company. And he goes to work and he comes home. So they're targeting criminals first. So how does it negatively affect you as a middle-aged white lady in Minnesota that they're taking criminals out that shouldn't be in our society anyways and removing it from our society? It doesn't. It doesn't negatively affect you at all. All you have is the emotional response of this moral ambiguity that you've created to justify your actions now. So that's another way you can kind of know that none of this is organic. Like, Renee Good was a serial activist. She protests all over the country. She never had a job. Her mom funded her life before she got into the whole protesting thing. She was trained, and her and her little wife dude thing that was out there walking
it
around too. Yeah, they
at
clearly were there with a purpose. They're not just dropping their kids off at school. She didn't even have custody of two of her kids. They found where ICE was going to be based on activist networks that are giving that information out to different people, and then they were going to harass them. They were going to try to stop them from doing their job, and that's the reality of the situation. There's no other reason for them to be there, right? So that's how you know none of these are organic.
Yeah, and the left also understands the optics of this as well. That's why you'll see a whole bunch of videos. You're starting to see them kind of get debunked now, but they understood the narrative that the media plays in all this, and that they had to create like this very You take a 10-minute video and you cut it down to 30 seconds. It doesn't show what was happening the 9 minutes and 30 seconds before you know
Hmm.
this U.S. citizen ended up in handcuffs or whatever. Um, and that's because they have to eliminate context, and that's another way it's actually not genuine at all. But and take for instance, you talked about some of these paid protesters. Look at this other guy from, and this is what the right needs to do better at when it comes to messaging and amplification. This guy Paul Birdsong, right? Have you seen like this guy, this Black Panther dude with the
Hmm.
automatic shotgun? Fake dude. He's like Puerto Rican too. He's like half Puerto Rican, and his company is their organization is incorporated in Nassau, by the way. So read into that what you will. But trying to talk like he's like the new leader of the Black Panthers. 2010, he's a convicted sex offender. He was actually uh, caught up and indicted again for not registering properly as a sex offender. And then B, the actual Black Panthers, and this is going to sound weird, but strange bedfellows, right? The actual Black Panthers have been trying to get out like their messaging that this guy is not us, and to the point where they're now actually going to counter protest the ICE protesters because
Didn't look as well.
they understand they're losing the PR war. So the right needs to strange bedfellows, man. You don't have to agree with the Black
Mhm.
Panthers. You just have to agree again with that specific messaging,
Yep.
and
Well,
that would be organic, by the way.
right. And you see that a lot of these people are criminals, right? And they've done terrible things throughout their lives. And this isn't an opportunity for them to either make money or to exploit a situation to benefit themselves. It's the same thing we saw in Kenosha when what's his name? When Rittenhouse ended up shooting those, killing those two dudes and shooting that other dude. They're all criminals, right? Why were they there? They don't actually give a shit about BLM. They're not actually even people are going to call them Democrats, and if they were to vote, they probably would have voted Democrat. But these people aren't voting, right? Like those dudes, the dude
Well,
that's
they're
a
dead, so they're voting Democrat now.
right, right, exactly. They're voting it now, but they're not voting. They're criminals. They're. I think again, there's no reason for activism in the United States because we are a free country. You can get on and say anything you want. It's freedom of speech. I mean, you can't threaten people. You can't, whatever, all that. I got that. But you can get on and you can have your opinion on whatever's happening, and you can create a coalition and you can push for change and in a democracy and all kinds of things. You can do all of that. Like we're not Iran, where the government's going to shut down the internet and then start systematically shooting people. So all of these people that are protesting all the time, they're like, what are you even doing? That's another way that that this is all inorganic. This is all set up and they're all operations. Because what do you really have to be outraged about in the United States, where the poorest of our civilization has big screen TVs and can go get all the food and steaks and Coke and fudge rounds and whatever else they want at the store, and they're perfectly fine and they don't even have to work. What are you protesting against, right? Like there's not a legitimate concern that's happening, and it's all manufactured outrage, and that's why it's all used as it's operations, because otherwise you're not going to get people to come out on the streets to protest no kings, right? Because we don't have a king, so we're like protesting something that doesn't exist anyway. It's just getting people to understand this. Like if you're standing on a street corner with a sign, you probably don't either don't have a method or are not smart enough to realize how to use the system and to, hey, I'm going to go get a following and talk about the things that are injustices or that do need to be fixed, right? But instead of that they're going out and they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're protesting, and they're at multiple different protests. It's so easy for me to see that it's inorganic, and for you, obviously, and other people. But it's really weird how the rest of the country, there's a large swath of the country that has no idea that these are inorganic protests, that these are operations.
Yeah, I mean, you said it best, man. You know, I couldn't put it any better myself. I would implore people to actually go look at what an actual revolution looks like, and then take that and contrast it with what you're seeing on, your social media feeds, which are, very much curated and, uh, again, very much edited out. And then look at, how that matches up with, again, this doctrine, which we've been talking about here today. Albeit, I would say we've kind of gone off subject of quite a bit today, but just reading this and talking about it, you understand that there's no real great way to, um, convey the text of the message, the messaging behind it without, some freaking, semester long course. Like I said, Beautiful Trouble, they literally spend, their institutes would spend a whole semester just dissecting that one
Yeah.
book, not even the historical angles behind it. But, you know, I would implore everyone to really read the Substack, and then if you would like, people want more, feel free to DM me or DM, GB, and we
Mm-hmm.
can provide a lot more sources. I mean, go to canvasopedia.com, VPN it if you want, uh, but that's kind of one of their libraries. It's one of their repositories. But there are many other ones out there as well. So just check those out. And I think we probably covered this thing good enough today. I've got to bounce,
Mm-hmm.
so not sure if you want to end it there. Or you're gonna keep going, but
I'll keep
unfortunately,
going again in a second, and I'll answer some questions, and then I'm gonna go into the Substack I did on the color revolution, the 6 vets video, real quick, and go over that. But man, appreciate you coming on for sure, and as
I mean,
always,
I've got a few minutes if folks want to do questions, and then you can pivot to that. But
okay.
yeah, I've got like 5 minutes, man. So if someone
Yeah,
wants to
anybody?
continue.
So I do I see. Well, I'll hit that one in a second. I don't see that many questions about any of the color revolution stuff or any of the Beautiful Trouble stuff. Let me see. Yeah, I think we're good, man.
All right, dude.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for coming out, and we'll see you on the next one, buddy.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you. Have a good weekend, bro.
You too, man. All right. So yeah, again, like Dante said, reading the Substack will be your best bet at just getting a good summary. Again, it's about 20 pages versus Beautiful Trouble is about 400 and something, and there's just a lot of information. It's kind of I mean, if you're going to read Beautiful Trouble, it's a lot of it's kind of dry, and then but it would give you a better outlook on everything that they're doing. And then Canvaspedia, let me actually share that right quick so that everyone can kind of see what this looks like here. This is great. This is a great source. It goes through all different kinds of operations and kind of gives you a good breakdown of what Canvas is and how it's being used. So definitely check that one out. And then real quick, we'll kind of pivot. I will answer a question. Hold on a sec. So we got here from Dr. Hans. Surprised you say it was wrong to enter the Capitol, the police waving people in. Yeah, I mean, again, from a situational awareness perspective, it was not smart to enter the Capitol. I understand that they were waving some people in certain entrances. I understand, there was parts that were a little more violent, a little more, stuff happening in the January 6th, and then there was other parts that were a lot more peaceful. the end of the day, right? You're at a big, protest, and a bunch of people are going into a federal building. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't go in there. I wouldn't go. I wouldn't have went anyway, just because you know I don't want to be a victim. And if we are protesting authoritarianism, or we're protesting this or that or whatever it ends up being, and those in power decide to use force, then you could get caught in that crossfire, and now you're worthless moving forward. So I'm not saying that protests can't be useful, especially from an insurgency perspective. I'm just saying that the choice to go in, knowing that there is about to be a regime change, and you're on the, what, I don't want to say the wrong side of it. It's not the wrong side, but you get what I'm saying. You're on the side that is going to be vilified after the fact. And so, and they did, and they exploited all of that, and they gave people, they locked people up for years, and then ended up only giving them trespassing charges and stuff. So that was my point of that. I'm not, again, I'm not trying to say that it was just like the stupidest thing you could ever done, but I would say in the future, if there is a protest going on at the Capitol, or in DC, or in anywhere really, and people start flooding into the federal building or wherever is going on, then that might be a smart move to like not follow in and kind of move on with your day, and break away from the situation. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see. Yeah. So reverse cause and effect. They run to the thing they don't like, make chaos, then blame the thing. Yep. I mean, it's about setting up a lose-lose situation for whoever you're protesting against. All right. So say I'm going to go out there in Charlie Kirk style and try to talk to some people, right? They're going to try, their counter protest is going to be to try to come and disrupt that in whatever way they can. And if they aren't removed and they aren't silenced, right, then they've won from that regard. And if they are removed and they are silenced, then they've won from that regard as well. So it puts the other side into what essentially a lose-lose. Now you can still try, and you can market it and everything, but the moral high ground is what they benefit the most off of, and emotionally charged arguments are always going to be a little bit more, especially when a video of it gets clipped and then posted on these TikToks, and then it's going to move quickly. And that's what they're actually going for here. Yep. Oh, Silverback got it. Yep. That's exactly what I was saying. He was saying the lacked situational awareness and common sense based on circumstance. As an operator, his take makes complete sense. Yep. That's what I was getting at with the whole protest thing for January 6th. All right. I'm going to share this. Let's pull this up right now. All right. So this is another article I did on the color revolution that we had a few of our senators and representatives, push a video out claiming that, soldiers should disobey, illegal orders, or, they should not listen to illegal orders and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of wanted to just kind of throw this in here so that you could see, just goes through the color revolution, what it's all about, and how the coordination happens and all that. Some others that will, the Orange Revolution and stuff that we've talked about in the Beautiful Trouble article. But this is what I really want to talk to you about, is the political trigger. All right. So the color revolution requires a catalyzing moment. That's one thing to really think about. So you could say a catalyzing moment in recent, just very recent, would be Renee Good, that her getting shot, regardless of the justification the ICE agents had. They absolutely had justification. That ICE agent was struck by her vehicle, and he ended up having to go to the hospital because he had internal bleeding. But they used the moral outrage of that as a catalyst to push, to get more people to join into these protests. And what the video was back in November 18th, by these senators and representatives that are all, mind you, either veterans or were members of the intelligence community. So they've all studied this and they all know exactly what they're doing. This isn't a, oh, whoops, I was just making a video to just raise awareness to my fellow countrymen. No, like they coordinated together to create this video with a, to give a political trigger for a narrative of delegitimization and to mobilize a youth vanguard, right? So that's what this was all about. They're trying to use, that Donald Trump is evil and he's going to make all of our troops do these illegal orders and delegitimize them and delegitimize any operations that this administration wants to push forward militarily, and then mobilize a youth vanguard that's going to push back against this. And that's why you see that they did it. And if you look back at the video and the clips of it, they'll say something and then the next person chimes in and they say it. It's all effective messaging, and that's directed at younger people who don't really know what they're watching. They don't understand that they're watching an op. They just think that this is a good video showing these people that truly care about America. All right, and then they used NGOs, foundations, and media to push that viral video even more. So these are all just some more examples. This article is on my Substack as well, and it kind of goes through. You see some of the same information there. Otpor from Serbia. You see a lot of the different color revolutions that are a part of or case studies of Beautiful Trouble. And then the video here, let's go into this, is the one of the things that was important was the strategic framing. Like they came in, they framed the moral issues that they had with what the evil President Trump is doing, so on and so forth. All that tactical choreography. This breaks it down. This is all doctrinal too. So whether or not it's UW doctrine, but it's all within the constructs of IO, information operations, psychological operations, and how Beautiful Trouble was made, and how all these other activist organizations and activist playbooks kind of unfold. That's why the whole point of this is to read, learn about this and how they do the things, so that when it comes up, hey, I just literally watched a strategic framing video that is obviously a part of some other op that they're trying to push for whatever reason, right? Whether it's to distract the populace, whether it's to get emotional outrage, like all these different things, they all have an end state and a goal attached to them. All right, legal but loaded, right? So they were very careful with their wording and what they said. They were very careful to not cross the line of legally, pushing for insubordination or for mutiny, because those, you didn't use any of those words, right? They spoke around it, but the intent was there, and everyone kind of understands what they're trying to do. And then you have these other, Protect Democracy, Vote Vets, which I did an article on Vote Vets. They're an organization that they don't help vets at all. Literally, all they do is they take money. They're a 501c4. All they do is take money and they put it into PACs to get left-leaning politicians elected. That's it. That's their only goal. And then they push a bunch of media and propaganda along with it. And then let's go through these real quick, and then I'll take a few more questions and we'll kind of probably peter it out from there. But this is the lawmakers that were behind it, and this is their profiles. So you have Mark Kelly, who is kind of he's a former Navy captain. He was an astronaut, so he's the kind of figurehead of this. And he's the husband of Gabby Giffords. So they used the whole her being shot thing as a part of all this. You go through, and these are the links: Democratic Alliance, Soros linked to mega donors, Bloomberg Philanthropies, another one, and Emerson Collective, which is Laurene Powell Jobs. All right, so then you have Elisa Slotkin, who was a CIA analyst. So what do you learn in the CIA? Pretty much exactly what she did in this video and how to set it all up. Jason Crow was an Army Ranger. Now he's in the House Armed Services Intelligence Committee. All right, strategically positioned. Chrissy Houlihan, Air Force veteran, educator, engineer, and strategically in a place where it's important for this. So that's why she's a part of the movement, right? And then her links to some NGOs are important. Chris DeLuzio, another Navy veteran, and he's an attorney. So this is your legal aspect side of it. So this is why he's involved in this video. And then Maggie Goodlander was a JAG officer. So there you have another legal constitutionalist scholar. They get to use all these big words and these important titles to show, exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. And then so together they form a military legitimacy, intelligence and legal credibility, NGO and strategy coordination, activist fundraising channels, and moderate optics for broad appeal. So that as you kind of look into these things and you look into the doctrine, you can really see how it's being formulated and why. And then once you're at that point, you're no longer going to be fooled by all of these things happening. You're no longer going to turn on the TV or turn on X or turn on TikTok or Instagram and be like, oh, this is happening. This is really bad. Maybe we do need to do something to stop this, or we need to join up in this revolution against authoritarianism in the United States. That's not happening. All right. That's kind of the reasoning behind it all. So I would encourage you to read both of these articles if you haven't, and then the Canvassopedia.org is a great tool, and Beautiful Trouble. You can buy Beautiful Trouble. You can generally find it and download the PDF for it. And I can actually post that PDF so that everybody can get it for free. But I'll do that later. But that's kind of the breakdown of all this. And then you have all these other links, right? So, and it's all out there. And this is all public information that anybody can find and anybody can look up if you're so inclined to do so. All right. Let's take a few more. What you got here? To support your point about not going into the Capitol, people have to realize situations like J6, you have so little control over your environment. Those fair-minded people who walked in calmly without violence protesting also became propaganda. They did, and they were lumped into the same boat as the people that were violent, or that did get pushed to be a little more violent or to break things or to destroy property and all those things that were obviously you're going to get in trouble for. I mean, you can't just go to a federal building and break a window and climb through it and expect that nothing's going to happen to you. That's just silly. And if you think that, then I don't even know what to tell you. But you have to understand, like they started letting people just walk in because there was violence happening elsewhere. And that's a way to just mitigate it. Hey, just let them in, let them walk through. We can control them inside a little bit better anyway. And it kind of splits up the protest a little bit. You have some people that are going to stay outside. We don't have enough manpower to manage it all right on the front lawn. So let's just see how this goes. And that's kind of what they did. And they also, like, the majority of that protest was not violent, and they knew that. I mean, they knew that this isn't an insurrection. There's no one's really armed here. And the few people that were, the pipe bomber, and then the other few people that did anything, violent, they were scooped up immediately. And then, but you just have to know that if you give an administration like the Biden administration was a means and opportunity to affect your life from a legal standpoint, you have to understand that they're probably going to do that, right? And so now you're in jail, for trespassing, and you're going to have to spend a lot of money to try to get yourself out of the situation. They have the high ground, they have the backing, and they have the authority. So just from my perspective, I would not put myself in that situation. If the government turns authoritarian someday, you're not going to see me at a protest. You're not going to see me anywhere. We're going to be, setting up the auxiliary and the underground and the guerrilla forces, and they're going to be, doing strategic moves that way to try to overthrow this tyrannical government. I'm not going to be out there with a sign that says, like, hey, you guys are terrible, come shoot me. That makes sense. Cool. Anybody else have any questions? Let me see. I'll go back through and make sure I didn't miss anything. Thank you again, everybody who got on here with us and kind of talked through this. and Mayor Sarge. And guess who's paying for their funding? Yep, a lot of NGOs out there and a lot of left-leaning donors that are pushing this funding. But from that same standpoint, the January 6th protest was also organized. It was not entirely organic. Now, I mean, President Trump did, he was having a little rally there. So there were some people that were going just for that, but there was a lot of other people that were involved in some different organizations. I actually have worked, I kind of shelved it. I'm working on it still. It was just a little bit harder to write than I thought it was going to be. But I have an article that kind of breaks down that too, and breaks down all the different movements, even right leaning and left leaning, and to show you that it does happen from both sides. It's just far more concentrated and far better funded and far more effective on the left. Insurrection Act. Man, I understand the thought process and I understand the reasoning, the cause behind it. I don't know that we're at that stage where we have to do that yet. I think you just have to allow federal law enforcement to interdict the people that they need to interdict. And if you're obstructing justice in any way, if you're blocking cops or whatever, we don't necessarily need the National Guard to come in and take you, but you need to have it set up where you have federal prosecutors that are on the same page and like, hey, we're not playing games anymore. You're going to get the full maximum penalty for these, whether it's a misdemeanor or whether it's a felony, whatever you did, you're getting arrested and you're going to get prosecuted. And now you're going to have to someone's either going to have to fund that to fight for you, or you're going to have to try to self-fund the situation you've put yourself in. If we go a little bit, if it gets a little bit crazier, then maybe the Insurrection Act might be something that could be used. Again, I always look at it from a standpoint of what these actions, if we do them right now, if we implement martial law, right, to stop this thing happening here, now we've set a precedence for something that can be used later by the other side once they take power. And that's what scares me. And that's what should scare everybody else. Not that, this might be somewhat necessary right now, but how is that going to be used against us in the future? And that's kind of the way I look at it right there. So that's why I have mixed feelings on, nuking the filibuster. And part of me is on the side of yes, nuke it. Let's get our elections, let's pass some laws that allow, secure elections and blah, 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 and do all this stuff. But then at the same time, Democrats are going to take power again at some point. The ebb and flow of how our political system works that's just the way it's going to happen. And, if we nuke the filibuster, then now what are they going to do with it? They can just come in and they can undo all those laws that we just did, because it only takes a civil majority at that point. So that's why, always look at your second and third order effects of what's going to happen by your either action or response to what is going on in a certain whatever situation you're in. So I think I'll kind of just leave it at that for you guys. I think I got all of them. We'll do some more. I'm going to get more. We're going to be doing more streams and more, information coming out so that, everybody can see the world the way that we see the world, so that it helps with the just basic understanding of not everything's organic and not everything is real. And what is sad, DWDJ said, what is sad is this is all basic common sense, but we, the general public, are so damn easy to manipulate. You're right, man. And again, a lot of it is just people don't know what they don't know. And if you haven't ever studied and you haven't been exposed to the world in a way, if you went to, you grew up, you went to school, you went into college, and all you've seen is what, the corrupt educators have taught you, and this world that, the media shows you that's not actually real. And that's all you hear, and every doctor's office you go into, there's CNN telling you that this is happening. And then there's MSNBC telling you that this is happening. And there's Fox News telling you that this is happening. If you're not a self-educated person, if you don't value finding information that is real and then making sure that you understand it and know that it's real based on your own research, you're never going to see the world the way the rest of us see the world. And I'm not saying that we're better because of that, but I'm just saying we have a perspective based on what we were trained in, what we've seen in other aspects of the world, and then just how everything kind of unfolds, especially now with how big these networks are and how much is just an operation. You would be very surprised at how close these operations that are unfolding in the United States right now are to what we, from psychological operations, from special forces, and what we do in other countries to manipulate the population, and it's happening here. So I can see it because I've seen it happen in real time in another country, and now it's in America and it's happening, and we're like, hey, that's all the same things that we used to do. So let's see what this is the last one I'll take real quick, and then we'll jump off. With the news from Maryland and VA fortifying against the federal agents, would that change your opinion? Yeah, again, yeah. My opinion will always change when better or more verified information is introduced. If there is a legitimate threat and a reason why we need to invoke the Insurrection Act to do any of that, then I'm not going to necessarily push back against it. But I do want to see, a little bit more necessity of why we would need to do that and why this problem couldn't be solved by just increasing a little bit of federal and local law enforcement manpower into the problem set, right? So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that. Again, I like to, when I'm giving the government complete authority over a situation in a way that the Insurrection Act would give, I want to be cautious with that, because that slippery slope, all these different things, the ways we can talk about it, it's just, now you're giving away control to something. And so then now the old saying comes in: if you trade liberty for security, you will end up with neither. So that's just kind of the way I look at the world. All right, guys, thank you guys so much for coming out. Hope we learned a little bit, and we'll see you at the next one. Have a great one.